so much for that welcome. And we're both very happy to be here to present this topic today at OWASP AppSec. Like previously introduced, my name is Megan, and I'm here with Uma, and we're going to be presenting practical threat modeling for real world and cloud situations in our hybrid and work from home world. So to take you through, we have a little bit of an agenda. We'll be doing introductions, and then we'll go over how to threat model with examples. And then we will be doing some actual practicing with threat modeling. So Uma will be taking us through that. And then we'll go through some questions and answers. So whatever questions you might have, please feel free to submit those through the Hula app, and we'll be going through those. So who am I? Well, I have had a variety of different experiences in technology. I have about 10 years of IT experience. And a little bit more than that. And I have a bachelor's in cybersecurity with a focus on network system administration and a master's in leadership. And I've done just, a variety of different things, be it exploring building with electronics, threat intelligence, risk assessment. So right now I'm doing threat intelligence and tremendously enjoying that. I think it's so important that we recognize that we are not an island and we didn't get here just by doing one thing or meeting one person or connecting with one group. And so I'm fairly involved with the information security community and in a number of organizations, both as a mentor and as someone who believes in constantly learning as a mentee as well. In fact, Uma and I actually met through Cloud Security Alliance, the Washington, D.C. chapter, and she runs the operations and I help provide some support with that. I also love to investigate research. So I'm a research advisory board member for Breaking Barriers in Cybersecurity. And then I love to travel. So I've been to all the states in the United States, several of the territories, and I'd like to go to all the continents one day. I'm about halfway there. And I also do some podcasting about AI ethics, research in artificial intelligence and emerging technology, and data loss prevention. Then I will turn it over to Uma to share about herself.
All right, hopefully you are able to see my screen. Good. Thank you, Megan, and thank you, moderator. Hello, everyone, and thanks for attending our webinar today. My name is Uma Rajagopal. I have 20 plus years of IT experience. I came to this country for about 1998 in Y2K projects. In the past decade, I've been mostly focused on information security, compliance, and third-party assessments. I have completed masters in cybersecurity and information assurance. Here are some industry certifications I have taken over the year. Facts about me, being a mentor at various cybersecurity platforms, so it's very critical to give back and very critical to make sure the people who wants to break into cybersecurity get the guidance they need. So please free to hit me up on LinkedIn. We will see where we can get there. If you catch me reading any books or looking at YouTube videos or podcasts, mostly it is going to be on cyber in the recent years. I've been a board member for Cloud Security Alliance, Washington, D.C. chapter. We run monthly webinars. Please check us out. And I also co-authored the Zero Trust Architecture for the D.C. chapter research team. Also check it out. It is up and on our website. One fun fact about me is I climbed Mount Himalayas prior to pandemic, and it was quite an experience. All right, let's get into the meat of this presentation. What is threat modeling? There is one card that comes to my mind when we talk about threat modeling. This is said by none other than our keynote speaker today, Adam. He says, threat modeling is a fancy name for something we do instinctively. I love this card. Here is why. Imagine you want to go for a walk. What would you do? You would do a quick health check to make sure you are good to go, you are comfortable going for a walk, and you don't have any pains. You will also check weather, to make sure it's not raining or it's not super cold or hot. Accordingly, you will take things that will help you. You also will grab phones or headset, possibly take water and little snacks if it is longer walk. You are going to let the people know who's living with you so that they don't have to worry about when you're stepping away. And you also use a notepad. What did you just do? You just did a threat modeling subconsciously. You looked at what you want to do and what could go wrong and what you can do to mitigate them. Or if there is something that you can accept the risk, you would accept the risk and move on. For example, you take the phone in the event something happens. It's kind of a alerting mechanism where you're able to reach someone for help. Likewise, water, your performance, you don't want to get your performance affected. So you would take water or snack to make sure you can go. Your availability of doing this is not affected. So this is why things that we instinctively think about what the threat is. Does it apply to me? If it does, what can we do to control? So I'm going to get back to Megan, who's going to take us through what the threat modeling is and why and how we do it. And I will circle back with the practical live example that we all can do together. Back to you, Megan.
Thank you, Uma. Okay, so Uma just took us through a very real world example that is something that, hopefully we're going outside, at least where we are on the East Coast here. It's been a lovely weather week. The leaves are falling, and, you can kind of think about planning and how that is going to relate to threat modeling and something you might do instinctively, right? So everyone can kind of place themselves literally into those shoes. So another thing that we might think about is how many things changed during this past year and into 2021 as well. So work in 2019 and then March in 2020, huge changes for a lot of people. And some of you might not have had any changes depending on what you do. It might be that your work always was work from home and it continued that way. But others of you, it might be that you now do work from home and you don't have a return date. I have a number of friends who work in government positions and they don't have a specific return to office date. And so you have to make a number of adjustments and think through what are different things that changed when those changes happen. And as you think through those changes, you might think about, well, at first, I just started working at home and I had maybe some bandwidth issues and I had to change that. And maybe I had work documents that I had out, or I had my screen open and maybe was on a call and a family member was home and maybe some of that information was sensitive and shouldn't have been heard. And so you have to start thinking about, like, maybe my workplaces actually changed and where you worked changed from home as the progression of work from home changed. And so those are ways that work from home threat modeling might have happened, where you might have actually instinctively changed things as you were iteratively trying what works and what doesn't work for my specific situation. And so as you can kind of think through, like, did you change things? What has changed? How have those changes happened? Those would be some of the ways that you might have gone through. Other things that might have happened, when you were in an office, you might have had a whole team that was devoted to pushing updates and making sure that everything that you were doing was fully patched and that they were checking all those different things ahead of time. And, maybe you saw a couple weeks ago with the with NPM that, oh, hey, I do some work with that. and I need to actually now do a self-check at home. What version do I have of this? And so you might be doing at home more self-checks of your technology than you did, because you might be mixing different things in a way that you weren't with your at-home network. Maybe you are isolating things in a different way as well too. So all of these are things that you might be thinking through, and changes that you might just be making very, very instinctively. So we've gone through an example of just being able to go for a walk, of thinking through changes that you might have made because of circumstances that happen globally. And hopefully, you're at this talk, the talk title caught your eye. Hopefully you think maybe threat modeling should exist and it should be something that one does, and maybe it's part of the work that you do. So we're going to just quickly go through why we should threat model. And this could also be something that you take back to your team if it's not something that you are currently doing and something that you want to have added to your systems and designs. So one of the reasons is that it does promote a security culture in your practices and design practices, and really trying to make sure that within that security culture that you're shifting security left, that you are making sure that you're trying to design things and think about things in a very proactive manner, and thinking about things from the design life cycle. And if you're able to come up with, oh, this could be an issue, and fix that configuration prior to it being an issue, that is going to cost much less money in the long run. Now, it could be that you as a team are not currently threat modeling. You already have some things in production. So that's perfectly fine. It is okay to add in threat modeling if you don't already have it. And so some of the reasons you might want to do that are because when in production but not already shipped, it can allow you to think through, hey, these might be some problems that might occur that an attacker might find. And so same thing, you would be able to save from a cost perspective. And then because you're working across different teams, and I'll talk through this a little bit later, and I know Uma will also discuss this when she goes through her example, you can really see how it can build teamwork because you're all working together to make the systems, the things that you design, more secure. And so it's with a very defenders-based approach, really thinking through, okay, these are maybe some things that could go wrong, but how do we fix it? How do we get to that before it would happen? To go back to Uma's example earlier, you think about when you're going to go for a walk and you check the weather. If you see it's a high likelihood of rain, you bring that umbrella. Sometimes you don't even need the umbrella, but the fact that you have it, right? You've done that preparation, you've been proactive. And so that's what a lot of this is about. And then you think about how then as a team, you're all helping each other, and then that builds that team culture and collaboration. So we've gone through some examples. We've gone through why we do it. Now let's actually get into some of the how and engaging with it. So I'm first going to be very, very broad with this, and then I'm going to go into some specific examples. So broad and then narrow. So it's not that there's any one single right way or one approach to do this, but what we're going to do today is go through a generalized framework and then go through stages that can be placed within this framework, and then also give some examples. So one place to start is, what exactly are you working on? What projects are these? What systems are you building? What different things are you working on? What can go wrong? Which that question in itself can be kind of an overwhelming question. And so asking it can be a brave thing to do, but it's a very important, and it's a very important thing to do as well. Okay, you've thought through, these are the things that can go wrong. And now maybe you're a little bit, nervous about those things. This is where this additional proactive piece comes in that I really enjoy, because you're really trying to make it actionable. What are you going to do about it? What are the steps that you're going to take? What are they going to be? Okay, you found that there is potential for cross-site scripting to occur. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to harden the systems? How are you going to mitigate that? Hopefully you're not just going to say, yes, we accept that risk. So what are you going to do about it? And that's the thing that I love, because, you can work with the different teams and actually make those systems better and fix them. And then, with any changes you make, you need to figure out, was that actually effective? Did it work? We came up with this plan to do this thing. We had a project manager on it. We tracked it. We thought it happened. Did it work? Did it do the thing? And so it becomes iterative, right? And so we'll go through a couple different models. So these are all, like I said before, there's not one right one, but you can kind of see with these different models. And then we'll go back out to another big picture example. But you can see with these different models that you can take threat modeling and really apply it in different ways depending on which projects you're working on. So being that we're at the OWASP conference, we thought it would be interesting to go through some different threat models and connect them with some of the OWASP top 10 from 2021. So one of the models, and we'll come back to this one later, is STRIDE. And so this is a caustic acronym. And so you can see it defined out. We have spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. And so what do all those things sound like, right? These are all threats that could occur. And so broad categories of threats. And you're trying to analyze, what could go wrong, and then come up with your strategy after that. And so within a couple of these, thought through, well, tampering. Tampering can often occur when injection occurs. Like, let's say you have PHP or SQL injection that can have data tampering, right? Or let's say you have a security misconfiguration where you thought that a certain patch was taking care of something, but then it did not. And then this led to certain ports being open. And so then that misconfiguration led to an attacker being able to come in, a much higher threat level, and that attacker was then able to elevate their privileges. So you can kind of go through different ways things can go wrong and categorize those threats. So that's one example of modeling. With a lot of these, you'd also be, of course, then be doing vulnerability scans, and you'd want to have asset management with knowing what different things you have in your systems too. A very different model, and the three models we'll be going through are all very different from each other. A very different model is called the PASTA threat model. So STRIDE does categorization of threats. PASTA takes an integrated approach where you're going through what type of simulations could occur. And it's essentially like you're thinking through almost like a war room strategy. Okay, what is our scope? What's our business strategy? How are we going to detect different vulnerabilities? What threat intelligence exists out there? And so then within these 7 stages, you know, the 6th and the 7th are really where you're getting into the proactive pieces. A lot of it is observational up to stage 5. And so as you model out the attacks, you're really thinking from an attacker mindset, what are all the things that can go wrong? How are all the ways our systems can be penetrated? And then what will we do because of that? So what are our proactive measures going to be? How will we fix these things? What risks will we mitigate, eliminate, accept? And so this ends up becoming a much more elaborate style. With stages 4 and 5, so here 4 and 5, the threat analysis, they really build on each other. So let's imagine that you gather threat intel on an organization, and this, like, it's an enterprise organization. They've had a variety of credential leaks. You know, it's standard credential leak. It's both a regular exposure, but then also there's some dark web chatter. Okay. So not only is it the accounts, but also it is that their passwords are, some of them are hashed, but some of them are actually in plain text. So it's quite the database for this enterprise organization. So how could this be used, right? So if we're doing threat analysis based on threat intelligence, we're going to be looking at, where is this being mentioned? Are these first time mentions? How might they be used? Are these active and current employees of this organization? And are any of these credential leaks upper level management, C-suite level? So all of these things are pieces of threat intelligence that would be taken into account as one is building up the analysis. Those credential leaks could be used with one of the OWASP top 10, the identification and authentication failures, because they could be used for various attacks. It could be used for brute forcing. They could be used just for regular logging in for the accounts. So that could be one way that the credential leaks are used. They could be used once one is in the system for privilege escalation as well. So the Colonial Pipeline was through a VPN access account, through VPN login from a credential leak. In stage 5, we also then might do a vulnerability scan. And we might see that our system scan shows us that we have certain ports that are open that we might not want open. Maybe we have remote desktop open just across the board for a variety of employees, regardless if they need this or not. And so we're kind of thinking through, okay, well, we might want to close some of these remote desktop access port places. So we can think through, as we gain information, right? So we gain information about these credential leaks. We gain information that there is a vulnerable component. Maybe there's a patch that happens, and then that leads to a further security misconfiguration. all of this is going to be used to paint a very elaborate picture about this organization, which will then be used to develop the countermeasures. And then the third model that I'll discuss today is the diamond threat model. And so you can think actually about a series of diamonds that can be attached to each other. And with this model, you can choose to have different centered approaches. A lot of people take the victim centered approach where they think about like, okay, these were different places that recently had attacks, and this could be a focus that we'll take. But you could take any of these approaches. So if we were to take the victim approach and we looked at the Scottish EPA and then maybe a couple different international luxury jewelers, and we saw, you know, what do these places have in common? Oh, they were both recently, within the last year, victims of the same adversary, a ransomware as a service scam. And we can see, okay, this adversary has, oh, sorry, let me go back one slide. This adversary has certain infrastructure. It has command and control servers. It has affiliate hackers. It has its own ransomware that it's built, botnets. And one of the systems that it's using for a lot of access is it's using remote desktop ports, which we can kind of think about how that might have gone up also during work from home. And one of these victims in particular, I do recommend taking a look at the way they approach this. So another thing with this centered approach you can see for looking at trend analysis is, you know, other factors of commonality. So SEPA, the Scottish EPA, was attacked at a holiday. And their entry access point was through remote desktop, and then privilege escalation. And then they have had 4 studies commissioned on that attack, and then they publicly shared that data. So they've said, you know, we learned a lot from this attack. We want to make sure that the security community also learns a lot from this attack. And so they've looked a little bit redacted, but quite a bit is not redacted from it. So that is a really interesting one to kind of pay attention to. So those are 3 models. And then as we're thinking through big picture, we want to make sure we've created a model, we've identified threats, we've addressed different threats. We want to communicate everything that we've done with all of these things. And then we want to make sure that all of the things that we've done are validated. So I'll go through those fairly quickly. So our first 3, as we create the model, we are thinking about scope, we're thinking about what could go wrong, we're thinking about what are the different systems that we're going to be looking at, what problems are we going to be trying to threat model. As we identify, we're going to be figuring out what tools are we using as well, what intelligence are we gathering. And then we will figure out addressing our threats, and we'll share out our findings, just like I was referencing earlier with the Scottish EPA, sharing out those findings. And that might be internal, of course. So there might be a purely internal, or there could be an external component to it, or a combination of the 2. And then we'll need to look through, did what we thought was going to happen, or should we be doing something differently? So as we create the model, it is really important to think through what and who are on the team. How much time is there to do this? Who's on the team? And that's going to determine a lot of different things for how the whole threat modeling process is planned out. So these are a couple different examples for this. We could think about, is it something that's new, or is it a subcomponent, or is it an existing process? And just like how I started broad and then we're becoming more and more narrow, it's the same thing with this. You can start broad and then focus. Then we would want to identify the threats. So what can go wrong? It goes back to those earlier 4 questions we're asking. So having a variety of people on your team is very important. And it requires a good mix of security knowledge, deep understanding of the information being threat modeled. Now, there are many different tools and methodologies for finding threats. And so that's one of the parts that you'll work on with scope as well. And then this can be, fairly enjoyable part of the whole process as well, because it's like kind of like poking at the whole system, like, oh, what are the ways that this could go wrong, but for a proactive manner. So as you've then figured out, hey, these are the threats, this is what we've learned, you then need to address them. You learned these are all the things, and hopefully you did figure out these are all the things. And so you need to decide if you'll eliminate, mitigate, transfer, or accept those. And so if you do not threat model something, I think this is probably one of the most important things within this. If you do not threat model something, you by default accept that threat. So that's going to be really important to think through. So even if it's something that you didn't think of, it is then a threat that you've accepted. As you are going through how you gathered your threats, what you did with them, what processes you took, that's where you want to have documentation. And the documentation is going to very much so tie in with your communication, right? Because you're going to see what actions you took or non-actions, how you prioritize things. And then this is also going to help with that teamwork that I spoke about earlier. And so you'll want to have a system that you're using for tracking that. So as you've documented things, you'll then want to communicate, aha, this is what we did. We found these things. We did these things. Who needs to know about everything you did, right? So who are your key stakeholders? Who are the people you need to share your findings? What is the best way to share that? And of course, then go ahead and do that. And then should you be sharing it out with the whole community? Is it something that the security community would benefit from learning about? So all these things are very important to think through. Now, our last stage is validating the model. And this is so important because you have to measure, did you actually do the things you thought you were going to do? Did you stay within scope, or did it have scope creep? If it had scope creep, why? What about criticality? Were the right people involved? And did you need to support other teams? Did you find enough threats? Was there a range of threats for severity and type? Did you kind of see different things with third parties, or see threats that were visible and actionable and allowed for team members to be accountable? And did you check in with subject matter experts? So as you're working through this, did you then act on those threats that you found? I've already walked through those 4 different things you can do. And as you're documenting, did you prioritize and act on those in a timely manner and figure out, did those mitigations work? And are you validating the mitigations? And this is the last question that I really like, this one. Did any mitigations introduce new threats? Because you need to be very cognizant that certain things you do can also then introduce new threats. So very iterative, right? So as you're validating that model, then you'll learn certain things that will end up being circled back to from a communication standpoint as well. So finally, do you kind of have these acceptance criteria? Do you have, as an organization, ways that you plan out, and do you work on things with your team where you have different maturity levels? So all of these things are so important to think through from a validation standpoint. And now we've gone through different threat models. We've gone through different ways to do threat modeling, and we've gone through very broad to very specific, right? We did 3 different threat models, and we just did like how to process that. We're going to actually do some practice, and I will stop screen sharing because Uma will take it over and lead us through a practice.
Right. Thank you, Megan. Appreciate it. Let's see. Can you guys see my screen now? All right. Thank you. Now that you have learned 5 stages of threat modeling that Megan walked you through, let's put that into practice. Let's take an example. All right. Let's take a billing system for our company that we want to threat model. So this application billing system accepts clients' transactions and process them through by applying some rules and send it back to the database for internal use. There is a batch process as well, which actually takes a file from clients that contains all the transactions and take them through to the database. And I also want to target the UI portion of this application in scope. This UI, basically what it does is the customer or client or external users or even internal users are able to log in and see their transaction. They can search for their transactions. They can export to CSV or PDF. And they also have a facility to reset their password. I also want to focus on admin users here who can create users, the client or the internal users as well. So this billing system has a lot more to do, but we are going to, for the purpose of this presentation, we are just going to focus on these 3, which is what we did on a step 1 to find our scope. All right. I'm going to go through this architecture. Typically, a person who is closer to this application, a team lead or developer, will walk you through to everybody who is in that session, so they all have a common understanding of what it is, so they can all identify the right threats. So I'm going to wear my developer hat on, and I'm going to walk you through this now. So feel free to find any threat you can come up with and put it on our chat window. All right, this application is, as you can see, it is in AWS, hosted in AWS, and it is in a single VPC account. You can see a couple of subnets. The top subnet that you see is where external users are logging into UI through HTTPS, and you can see there is a WASP is available. In the middle section where the middle subnet is, you have UI component, application component, and also a couple of APIs that does some processing, whatever rules you have set it up to process those transactions or any action the users took on the screen, you would have to process those. So it all happening in the middle subnet. And once it's done, it sends off the data to ODS or retrieves the data back from ODS to the web UI. The ODS database itself is in separate subnet. Then up at the bottom, you see there is another subnet where the external files that the client sends are put in an S3 bucket, and there is a Lambda function which takes the data and processes it through and send it back to ODS for any internal processing or any other internal system to consume that data. So I'm going to check off my developer hat. I hope everybody has a common understanding. Now I'm going to go back to look at what can go wrong here. So we are going to apply what Megan just walked us through. Before we go there, I want to, I recommend gamifying this. What I mean by that is split into a couple of teams and see if you can score, if some team finds out the good thread and someone comes up with some controls or medication or a mediation control in place, score them. Try to have a game within the team itself and see who gets what and who can get a high score. Not only this developed the team, the team development here, but also at the end of the day, you are finding the threats, and also it makes everybody in the session are able to participate and attend and comes up with the threat that they can come up with and breaks that barrier of openly talking about what could go wrong here. So highly gamify this. And we are going to be using the framework Stride, not past our diamond that Megan walked us through, but we are going to use Stride. Just to recap what Stride is. Stride is basically spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege is what we are going to use that as a format and identify those threats here. One thing I want to note it down here is I want to acknowledge the fact that this application has a solid segmentation, which has multiple subnets that reduces the landscape, threat landscape here, or attack surface, you can call it. So it's a really good segmentation, and not only the segmentation, it also has its own security. Each component has its own security group, which is great. So let's go into identifying some threats here. Hopefully you would catch what I'm going through. By no means it's all complete. I'm sure we can find a lot, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to stick with a couple of them. Malicious file sent. This is a case of tampering, where you would somebody would tamper get access to the location and change the file, probably the data within the file, or change the entire file itself. If you are looking at or expecting CSV file, it could just send you JPEG with the bad code in it. That could be devastating if that if that threat exploits the vulnerability that we have. Other one I can think of is, again, this is the element of spoofing will come into picture, where an attacker can act as a spoof, as a valid user, can get onto the UI and navigate through and get the data, exploit the data, or do some damage to the system. Data security that goes with information disclosure is a big thing. Since this is a billing application, obviously you would have some NPI data. You have to make sure they are protected. Developer rotation. This is oftentimes not looked at. So that's why I wanted to bring it here. Elevation of privilege element is in picture here. The smaller organization, sometimes, most of the time, they have shared developer resources where they would work on this project and then they move on to a next project. When they do, it is very critical. It is important to make sure the access control is cut off if not necessary. Very critical here. The same goes with the access control. That's part of elevation of privilege, where an admin user should not have access to update a transaction or upload a file. So that need to know at least the privilege, the fundamental of best practices should be followed here. So that could be one of the threats. AppSec finding, this would tick off all the elements of Stride. Depends on the vulnerability that you can find on the database, or you can find on the web UI, or even on the API itself. So you do have to see what vulnerability does, how your patch management will look like. It's very critical here. There's one example I wanted to provide for denial of service. what if an attacker sends you thousands of files, wherein your Lambda function is designed or expecting to do only one file at a time? This will bring down your entire system. You're not able to process the actual real file, which means your availability of the system would be gone. So you have to think through all of those elements and see what can go wrong. Again, this is not complete list. There are a lot more we can come up with, but I'm just limiting for this webinar here. Once you find those threats, you have to document them, kind of register, I would call, and see whatever tool of your choice, according to your organization, you would register them, you would document them. Here, the risk you see here is, I have mentioned this high. This is before you add any context, or before you know what kind of mitigation control you have in place. So it's now came up with a high. You would document to whatever we have found now. Then I want to go back into, the next step would be you have to go deep dive into each one of them and see how you want to address this, right? So let's take one example here, which is, malicious file upload. Would cause an insecure deserialization attack if you don't have the right control in. You will have to find out, okay, what control we have now, mitigating control or compensating control. What do we do here in order to bring the risk level to low? So if you have, say, for example, SSO MFA, only trusted source can be deserialized. Then your risk level could go back to medium. In that case, you can open up a backlog story and then get it prioritized. But if your threat level is still high or critical, the step 4 of communicating is very critical here. You have to let your leadership know that you have this vulnerability high and critical, and they can help you prioritize them. So the recommendations here: virus scan, obviously file size check. If you're expecting 10 gig and the file size is 100 gig, you have to make sure you have some controls to test that. And privileged user access should be monitored, like admin users should not be able to go back and update the data. One more example I want to give you here. I would like to see the time. I want to make sure we are cognizant of time here. All right. So one example here, I want to take it. This is the example where you would accept the risk. In that way, I wanted to show you this example where you can accept it. I'm going to pass for a second here. Why this is a threat? Let me know, what do you think this could be a threat for the organization? Okay. I'm going to come up with this. This is what I came up with. By allowing the remote locations means that any sensitive data can be visible to your friends and families of employee. This directly goes to the element of stride. So you will have to find out what mitigation control you have or compensating control you already have, and which will reduce your risk rating to the low if you have those controls in place. So for example, you don't have to show all sensitive information in every screen. You can mask them. You show them only when it is absolutely needed. That's one of the control you can implement if you don't have it. On a compensating control, obviously, you can recommend a privacy screen. You can give them a mandatory CBT where the employees goes through and see how they can work from home safe and secure. Obviously, you can do a background check on employees. So the recommendation I come up with is, document the threat for visibility, of course, and then continue to monitor for any anti-patterns. So going back to the documentation, now the risk is reduced to a medium. For the first example that we walked us through, you will go into each one of them and do the same exercise on what you will do, what kind of story it is going to create for you, how you can prioritize them. So we have done a step 1 to 4, and now this part, validation part, is really, really critical. The reason is, did you cover the right component? You have to make sure you are covering the right component so that, it makes sense for that session. And did you have all level of skill set in that session? Did you have extended team come on board and attend the session to go through this exercise with you? Did you find enough threads? Most importantly, did you find the right threads? It's very critical. And also have to make sure the threats that are identified are visible and actionable. Are you acting on the threat that you have found? I like the example what Megan said, she stressed around, if you have acted on a threat, did it introduce any new threat? That has to be, looked at and then had to be documented as well. And is the approach to threat modeling working? What I mean by that is, there are ways to validate if this approach is working or not. For example, pen testing. If you have a lesser number of findings, that's one way to see if this approach is working for you. Secondly, you do, and also you have to make sure that this approach, the pen testing is less, and also have to make sure that your DevSecOps cycle is lesser now. So all of those metrics will tell you if this approach is working or not for you. All right. So here are the recap. To recap, here are the 5 steps of threat modeling: create the model, identify the threats, address the threats, communicate the results, and validate it. Now that go back to the example we started out with, going for a walk and things you would do, right? Now that you know all these 5 steps of threat modeling, apply them into everyday, development life cycle to make sure that if whether it's a future or it's a component or a new initiative, you would have to apply them. Go back to that example I provided before. And go simple. Don't overthink it. Go broad as you can. There is no one way or one right way to do this. And introduce now. There's one thing, if you have to take it away from this presentation, this would be it. Introduce the threat modeling to your development team and reap the benefit of threat modeling. With that, I conclude our presentation. And here are the references that you can use. And here's our contact information. We can be available on the LinkedIn, and Megan can be contacted on Twitter as well. Now we are ready for Q&A.